Hello and welcome to Eastern Connecticut, the former kingdom of the old-time dancing masters. Like John Carlton, who was so adept with the old fiddle and bow that he could play music, call out dance steps, and sleep all three at the same time. He'd be up on some makeshift stage in a backcountry barn somewhere, dozens of dancers beneath his feet, drawing his bow across the fiddle strings, yelling out step after step after step, and he'd be doing it all well deep in the grips of the Sandman. His eyes closed, just rocking back and forth in a trance, totally exhausted after officiating 3 or 4 dances in just the last week. And what about Professor Hazen, a true legend in these parts, almost 100 years old and hardly 100 pounds heavy. He'd be skipping and dancing across the stage, twisting in the air like a pine needle hung on the autumn breeze. And of course, who could forget the mystery of Wheeler Avery, a very well-known officiant who led dance after dance after dance after dance before one day in 1896 just disappeared for good. He handed his wife a whole bunch of money and he walked out the door and he was just gone, like that, fiddle and all. But of course, as legendary as those 3 fiddlers once were, none can hold a candle to the king, the most popular dance leader in Eastern Connecticut for almost half a century. 6 feet tall, 250 pounds, a mountain of a man with a step as light as a feather. There will never be but one Gurdon Cady, a forgotten legend whose name alone could attract a crowd from miles around. Standing up on stage, he'd beam down a sunshine smile, hold that fiddle beneath his chin, and watch as the eager hundreds before him began to match up with their partners, turn their eyes up towards the stage, and call out in unison, as one, all ready, Mr. Cady. All right, so today we're here to talk about a truly remarkable headstone meant to commemorate a truly legendary figure. So legendary, in fact, that it can sometimes be difficult to parse out the truth about the life of Gurdon Cady from the folklore that built up around his reputation. But if you ask me, that doesn't really matter too much. You know, the myths and fables are kind of half the fun with this type of folk hero, at least in my opinion, so just try and keep an open mind as we run through all these crazy stories. But before we get into the real wild stuff, let's just start off with the basics. What exactly was Gurdon Cady doing at all these country dances? Like, what was his specific job? The newspapers always referred to him as a prompter, but what does that mean? Well, it's pretty much what you might expect. You know, the job of the prompter is to stand up on the stage with the musicians and kind of half sing all of the dance moves for the audiences. So the fiddle starts playing and then the prompter goes, "Salute your partners. First 2 couples forward and back, swing your partner to the left." You know, like basically exactly what you might imagine goes down at a barn or a country dance hall somewhere in the 1880s. In addition to calling the dances though, the prompter was also expected to be like a sort of host, you know, like crack jokes and fill the space between the dances, basically set a real lighthearted tone of fun and excitement for the whole event. What made Gurdon so special though is that he could actually do all of that while also playing lead fiddle in the dance band. See, most prompters just kind of stood on the stage and called the moves without doing anything else, but Gurdon was one of a very select few who took an active part in the music making. So he was up there on the stage, drawing his bow and singing out the steps loud and clear over the music, which was a very rare talent back in the day. All that aside though, above all, what made Gurdon just so popular was his wonderfully upbeat personality. A suave, easy, noble-hearted country gentleman, the newspapers called him. A man without an enemy, overflowing with good humor, remembered every single person he ever met, and always had a hearty handshake waiting for him upon meeting again. So you kind of put all that together, and it is no surprise that Gurdon Cady was sometimes referred to as the King of the Fiddlers, far and away the most famous prompter of his time. What's really interesting though is just how localized that fame really was. Like, the actual land area that Gurdon operated in was pretty small. The newspapers generally marked out Gurdon's territory as north to the Massachusetts state line, south to the Long Island Sound, west to the Connecticut River, and east to Providence, Rhode Island. This little rectangle was the entirety of the domain of Gurdon Cady, the finest fiddler to ever grab a hold of a bow. The most requested prompter in the region by a mile. Like, take a look in pretty much any newspaper printed inside that rectangle from about 1850 all the way up to Gurdon's death in 1897, and there is a very good chance that you're gonna come across an advertisement for a dance being led by Gurdon Cady. Like, here he is leading a social club dance in 1889, and here he is at an iron molder's ball in 1882, and here he is playing on a boat headed down the Connecticut River in 1891, and here's another dance from 1875, and another one from way back in 1869, and here's 1859, and finally the absolute earliest record of a Gurdon Cady dance that I could find was way back in 1851. Like, they were not lying when they said that Gurdon Cady was leading dances for almost half a century. Like, the guy was so popular that I even found a Gurdon Cady dance being advertised on the same page as another Gurdon Cady dance, just like a few articles down. And this is from 1895 too, when Gurdon was already 72 years old. Like as you can see here, for most of his life, Gurdon Cady was a busy, busy man. Which makes it especially interesting that dances were hardly the only interest that Gurdon Cady had. Like, I found all sorts of other stuff that Cady was getting up to during his 7 decades in this little pocket of New England. Like check this out. Apparently, Mr. Cady was the president of the Plainfield, Connecticut Board of Health. And he was a member of the local Freemason Society. And he led a dancing school. And he was the vice president of the Windham County Agricultural Society. Like, Gurdon was doing everything out here. But even beyond that kind of like official leadership stuff, the name Gurdon Cady tends to just pop up in the weirdest places in these old newspapers. Like, look at this. Here's an article from 1877 talking about how a local farmer grew a record-breaking corn stalk, almost 12 feet tall. And where did this humble farmer happen to get the seed that grew this magnificent stalk? Why, from Gurdon Cady, of course, and there is no other information in this article. Like, he just got the seed from Cady, and that is all you get to know. And here we got a horse race from 1869 in Norwich, Connecticut, with Mr. Cady judging the race. And apparently in 1884, an oil lamp fell over and lit a dance hall on fire, and there was this whole big commotion, and everybody's running around in a panic, and finally, a guy named Thomas had the bright idea to smother the fire out with his coat. And who suggested that Thomas go ahead and do that? Well, Mr. Cady, of course. I like to imagine that Cady gave that suggestion while he was in the middle of prompting. So he's like, grab your partners, swing them around. Mr. Thomas, put out that fire. Undoubtedly though, Gurdon Cady's biggest interest outside of dancing was the raising of farm animals. Like, Cady owned a big farm in the Connecticut countryside with a whole bunch of hens and geese and cows and cats and dogs. And according to legend, whenever Gurdon would go marching across his land, all of his animals would just fall right into lockstep behind him, just marching along in his wake. So we got an old white-haired country gentleman just strolling through the New England countryside with a whole farm walking along behind him. Out of all of his pets, though, there was one species in particular that Gurdon was real proud of, his fine stock of Jersey cattle, of which he had a particular favorite, one farm animal that he loved more than any other, Rosa, the dairy cow, the pride and joy of the king of the fiddlers. Like, just look at this here. Like, in addition to the fiddle on one side of the tombstone, Gordon's got his favorite cow immortalized on the other, complete with her personal record in butter production, 2 pounds and 15 ounces from just 1 day's worth of milk. And apparently Gurdon was real proud of that record too. Like, he would just bring it up all the time in casual conversation to whoever would listen. He loved bragging about Rosa. And to be honest, I gotta say, that is a pretty damn impressive record. Gurdon, I'd be bragging too. By the way, I'm guessing that some of you by now might have guessed another particular little quirk about this headstone, which is that Gurdon actually designed it himself several years before he actually died. Like, he had this thing carved right here in this spot, in this cemetery, all under his direct supervision. Like, both the cow and the fiddle were done to his exact specification, with him standing right here watching. And if you're wondering, the other 2 sides of this monument, they list some of Gurdon's family, like his dad, Elisha, and his mom, Betsy, and his wife, Mary, who died just a few years before Gurdon did. And then also listed on this headstone and buried here with Gurdon is a woman named Mary J. Lee, whose relationship to Gurdon is just a little bit hazy. Like, sometimes she's listed as his housekeeper, and sometimes she is reported as a family friend or relative, and a lot of sources actually say that Mary was adopted when she was a young girl by Gurdon and his wife. But regardless of her exact relationship to Gurdon, we do know one thing for sure about Mary Lee, and that is that she was kind to dumb animals. A trait of hers that apparently really won the heart of Gurdon Cady. When Gurdon died, he actually left a huge chunk of his money and the entirety of his property to Mary. Like, here's a picture of her from 1929, 75 years old, still living on Gurdon's farm, and she's got nothing but good things to say about him, 30 years after he died. And Gurdon's death, by the way, as you might expect, was just a huge event in this part of New England. Like, all the newspapers wrote these unbelievable, just beautiful, glowing eulogies of Gurdon, and well over 1,000 people showed up at the funeral to pay their respects to just this great man that had provided them with so much entertainment. And people even brought picnics out to the cemetery. They're rolling in at the crack of dawn, trying to guarantee a good view with a ceremony. And it's so easy to just take a look at this sleepy little graveyard here and imagine that scene, you know, just like hundreds of people packed in here, with each one fondly remembering the bellow of Gurdon Cady's voice and the ring of his fiddle and his great frame just shimmering around on the stage and calling out move after move and drawing in the crowd, enveloping them in the moment, holding them tight, and until finally they poked their head out from the grasp of his music, only to find that the sun was coming up and that they had danced the whole night away. Like, it is no wonder that people used to travel for miles through the ice and snow just to see Gurdon call a dance. Like, even a quarter century after he died, newspapers would still advertise events by saying that there would be prompting a la Gurdon Cady. And that is just about where the facts about Gurdon Cady start to dry up. Like, from here on out, we kind of get into the folklore, you know, the legends, the stuff that maybe happened, but maybe didn't. But I'll let you be the judge of that. For now, let's start off with Gurdon's famous catchphrase, "All ready, Mr. Cady. the line that the audience used to shout up to Gurdon to let him know that they were ready to dance. From what I've read, that line held a lot of weight, even long after Gurdon's death. Like for a great example, check out this story that I found in a newspaper from New London, Connecticut back in 1913. According to this, a journalist was one day riding a train in New England when he saw a man walk up to the train conductor and say, "All ready, Mr. Cady?" Basically the same way that you might say, "How are you?" And then the conductor responded in the same way, just tipping his hat and saying, "All ready, Mr. Cady." Certainly a peculiar sight if you've never heard of Gurdon Cady, right? Well, after a little investigation, it was revealed that both of these men used to attend dances officiated by Mr. Cady back when they were young men. And so the phrase just became almost like a secret code between them, like a way for those who grew up in the barns and the dance halls of the Connecticut countryside to recognize each other. This was actually a very common theme that popped up all the time when the newspapers talked about Gurdon, especially after his death. Like, get two men from Connecticut together and the conversation will ramble its way on over to Gurdon Cady dances before you know it. Or how about ask an old timer from Eastern Connecticut about the good old days and he'll be bringing up Mr. Cady before half a dozen words spill out his mouth. Really though, that is just the beginning of the Cady legends. Like, the stories go a whole lot deeper than that. In particular, there is a whole bunch of old tales out there about sort of strange things that Cady reportedly got up to during his dances. One of my favorites stems from his strict no drunkenness policy. See, Gurdon Cady was totally fine with some responsible drinking, and he was even known to like take a swill or two himself when he was up on stage. But the one thing that he would not tolerate was someone getting real drunk and disrupting the dance, like ruining the festivities for everyone else. And his method for handling that kind of situation when someone got real drunk at one of his dances was pretty unique. Apparently, if Gurdon spotted somebody just stumbling around making a ruckus with a bottle of liquor in their hand, he would jump off the stage, march right up to the guy, grab the bottle away from him, chug the entire thing himself right then and there, and then slap the empty bottle back into the guy's hands and throw him out the front door of the dance hall. And then he just hop back up on the stage and get on right back to fiddling. Sometimes though, Gurdon himself wouldn't even have to be the one to keep the dance floor in check. Like, sometimes the audience would do it for him. Like, I guess one time a drunk dude just came like barreling into a dance and started a huge fight and then accidentally snapped Gurdon's bow in all the commotion. And Gurdon didn't have to do a thing about it, because right away, a dozen fists rained down on the guy and converted him into a wall-eyed gladiator. Then the crowd just threw him out the door and patched up the bow, and on went the show. In addition to his stance on drinking, another particular quality of Gurdon's was his tendency to kind of lightly poke fun at various dancers, which was something that his audiences actually grew to expect and even enjoyed. Like, one time, I guess he saw a guy named Brooks just totally stumbling around out there on the floor, missing every single dance cue, like just moving around like he had two left feet. And so Gurdon called out to him from the stage in time with the music, "Brooksy, Brooksy, there you go. The more you dance, the less you know." Cady actually had a certain phrase for describing bad dancers too. He would say they had a Methodist right leg and a shaker left leg. Another one of Cady's favorite things to do was to like call out specific prompts to people that he noticed getting lost in the steps. Like if he was up on stage and he saw somebody on the floor just kind of floundering, they totally lost the beat, they're not sure what to do next, then Gurdon would yell out a line just for them. Like, here's a great example. One time he saw a guy just totally way off beat, losing his step out on the floor. So Gurdon screamed out to him, "You there, swing that girl in the yellow dress." And then the guy and the yellow dress girl would just start swinging, and I guess nobody else in the audience would even realize that Cady had just rescued someone from drowning in the sea of dance steps. He's just super stealthily honing in on people and giving them like a specific prompt to get back on beat. My very favorite of all these stories of Gurdon kind of yelling out weird stuff from the stage though is what he said to a guy one time who had the audacity to show up late to a dance. As soon as the guy stepped through the door, Gurdon just like honed in on him from all the way up on the stage and chastised him for being late, and then just started singing in time about how the guy had been regularly seeing a local girl in town. So if you come in late to a Gurdon Cady dance, then he's just gonna start dishing all the local gossip about you to the whole dance floor. But okay, I think it's finally time that we close out this video with a couple of stories about the headstone here itself, since this is undoubtedly what Gurdon Cady is most well remembered for. Like ever since he had this thing put up, newspapers have been running stories about it, and for good reason, right? Like, it's certainly a unique stone. But its uniqueness goes a whole lot deeper than just how it looks. Like, for example, according to old legend, Gurdon actually left a bit of a surprise at his gravesite here for his friends to stumble upon after he died. See, before Gurdon died, he actually had his grave completely dug out and then covered with a big stone slab. And then after he died, it was revealed that he had left some specific instructions for two of his friends. What they were supposed to do was to go to the grave before the funeral, before anybody else was there, and lift off the stone slab and take a look inside. And so the two friends did as they were told, and they lifted off the stone, and there, sitting in the grave, was a big bottle of liquor inscribed with the names of the two friends and a message from Gurdon that simply said, "Drink heartily." I guess the next morning, the cemetery groundskeeper had to lift the two guys back out of the grave because they couldn't climb out on their own. But all right, I've been saving the best for last. One final little secret that this stone holds, and it has to do with its construction. Remember earlier that I said that Gurdon Cady used to come down to this cemetery and like watch as the carvers got to work fixing up the stone? Well, almost certainly that was the truth, right? Like, that's no folk legend. It is very likely that Gurdon Cady was actually down here supervising the construction of this thing. But depending on who you ask, or depending on what you read even, you might just find out that the story goes quite a bit deeper than that. According to old folklore traditions, Mr. Gurdon Cady would come on out to this cemetery with his fiddle in hand, plunk himself down, and start playing a song, like Arkansas Traveler, for example. And as the carvers chipped away, there was that great fiddling master, Gurdon Cady, working along with them, playing in time to the clang of their chisels, matching the beat as they chipped away at his masterpiece. And when the whole thing was done, he finally put down the bow, took a look at his stone, drank the whole thing in, and said, "It just fits the bill. I wouldn't have altered it one iota." I wouldn't either, Gurdon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.